Remember when you were surprised by a pop quiz? Oh, I hated pop quizzes. It's a sudden, unexpected test which takes you by surprise. It isn't like the final exam where you cram the night before, you drink as much coffee as you possibly can to stay up all night. No, there is no warning when it comes to a pop quiz. You walk into the class and the professor says, take out a sheet of paper because you're going to be tested. Well, in John 6, Jesus gave the disciples a couple pop quizzes. We discussed the first quiz last week, and I don't even know if you realized it was a quiz. The first quiz is, how do you feed a hungry crowd of more than 5,000 people when you do not have a McDonald's, a Burger King, or a Wendy's nearby? It's been a long day. Everybody's hungry and tired. I know what that means. It means cranky people. Because that's what you become, cranky, when you're hungry and tired. And if you remember, according to John, Jesus turns to Philip and asks, where are we going to buy bread for these people to eat? And if you recall last week, Philip is dumbfounded. None of the disciples have enough money to provide dinner for a crowd this large. But look at the text again. Because maybe you noticed that John, the gospel writer, added a clarifier in John 6:6. And here it is. I want you to listen. Here it is. Jesus said this to Philip to test Philip. It was a pop quiz. Because Jesus knew what he was going to do. Jesus had everything under control, but he wondered if Philip realized it. Jesus gives a pop quiz to see whether Philip and the other disciples had paid proper attention to the miracles which they had already seen Jesus do, and to draw their attention specifically to that which he was now about to perform. Now remember, this is John's observation of the facts. You will find that John, as you read throughout his gospel, often interweaves his own judgment with the facts. So after sitting at the feet of Jesus and hearing him teach the multitude, then the disciples, it says, watched him feed over 5,000 people with what? 5 bagels and 2 sardines. This wasn't done with mirrors. There was no trick photography at work. They had felt the loaves of bread with their actual hands. They had passed them out to the multitude. And then they picked up at the end 12 bags full of leftovers, and that was the lesson of the day. It was a lesson in the power which Jesus possesses. It was a lesson in his sufficiency. Couple what happened that day in the feeding of the 5,000 with what they had seen Jesus do previously, and it should be becoming clear to the disciples who Jesus is, the Messiah, the Son of God. Now that's what we discussed last week. Now that the disciples, as well as ourselves, have been exposed to Jesus' first lesson, it's time for a second pop quiz. And the second quiz takes the shape of a strong wind. Look closely again at the text with me. After Jesus finished feeding the 5,000, John tells us that Jesus wanted to slip away. Now, why did he want to do that? Because some of the people wanted to force him to be king, all for the wrong reason, and Jesus knew it was not his time. But before Jesus goes to look for a quiet spot further up the mountain where he can refresh himself, Jesus instructed his disciples to go on ahead of him to Capernaum. Faithfully, the disciples obeyed. Look at verse 16. When evening came, Jesus' disciples went down to the sea. They got into a boat and they started across the sea to Capernaum. Capernaum is a few miles to the north of Tiberias on the northwestern tip of the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus and the disciples had crossed over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee early that morning. And it had been a long day. It's now dark. And the disciples, in obedience to to what Jesus had instructed them to do were returning to Capernaum without him. Why Capernaum? Well, to Jesus and the disciples, Capernaum wasn't just another place to go. Capernaum was where Jesus and several of his disciples lived during much of Jesus' ministry on this earth. We believe that the disciples who actually lived in Capernaum for quite a while were Simon Peter, his brother Andrew, James the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, and Matthew. Now, as the disciples head for home, about 5 miles across the Sea of Galilee by boat, we are told in verse 18, the sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. And this is the second pop quiz. It had been a long and challenging day for the disciples. They had crossed the sea earlier in the morning, then walked up the mountain where Jesus miraculously multiplied food. And many of us think that the feeding of the 5,000 is an incredible miracle, and I pointed out to you last week that they only counted adult males. Now, I come in with more conservative numbers. I figure if you count the women and the children, there were 10,000. We got some scholars who say there were 15,000 there, and some even 20,000 people who were fed that day. That's an incredible miracle. And as we read this, we might come away with the impression that at the end of the day, after they had witnessed what Jesus had done, that the disciples abandoned Jesus on this side of the Sea of Galilee as they headed home. And they just left him stranded there. Now that would be reading into the text something that's not there, because to the contrary, this story is also recorded in the other Gospels, and Mark, in the telling of this event, makes it clear that the disciples were operating under the instructions of Jesus. Jesus sent them away. Jesus told his disciples to do something, and they did it. They were doing what Jesus told them to do. They were in the right place and at the right time, and they still eventually find themselves in the middle of a powerful windstorm on the Sea of Galilee. Have you ever felt that way? I know Jim and Joanne on their trip up to the Grand Canyon felt that way. We didn't do anything wrong, and now we find ourselves stuck on I-17 in the middle of no place, in the dark and the cold. I mean, you're doing the right thing. You feel that your action may actually even be glorifying God. And boom, you encounter a problem. Sometimes problems catch us by surprise. So here they were in a boat in a storm in the dark. Have you noticed that all storms seem worse at night? Oh, your chest laying there, that's all you can think about. You can't even get to sleep. Maybe you're in the storm right now. You may be thinking to yourselves, Lord, what did I do to deserve this? It may be that you've done nothing wrong. Realize this, it is possible to be completely obedient to the Lord and still find yourself in the middle of a storm. The disciples must have experienced a deja vu moment out there in the Sea of Galilee. You know, they made this trip like commuters across the Sea of Galilee. Though not mentioned in the Gospel of John, the other Gospel writers tell us that this was not the first storm the disciples had encountered on the Sea of Galilee. They had been out there before, possibly in the same boat, possibly in the same spot of the lake. Remember, the boat, because of all the water that was coming over the top, began to sink. And what did they do? They woke up Jesus, who was asleep in the back of the boat. And you recall he stilled the storm. Can you believe? Now here they are again, deja vu. I can imagine Peter saying, I know what to do, I know what to do. We'll wake up Jesus, and he can turn the storm off. And John answers, Peter, we have a bit of a problem with that. Remember, we left Jesus back on the shore. And to make matters worse, John tells us they took the only boat, and so that means the Coast Guard is not going to come to rescue them. So what do you do when you're alone in the midst of the storm? You know that Jesus is aware of what you're going through. Yes, we know that Jesus knows us. But when troubles come, look as you might, you can't see Jesus because you're so filled with the problem. I believe that there was something in the boat that night that should have comforted the disciples. Leftovers! Nobody comforted you with leftovers. There were 12 baskets of leftovers which testimony to the power and the compassion of God. I actually need leftovers, but actually these leftovers would have been very powerful. And when they looked at those 12 baskets, they should have realized that the God who provided for the needs of the multitudes would not fail to provide for them in the midst of a windstorm. But they forgot that fact. Now we are guilty of the same thing. We have been blessed by the Lord in an abundance of ways. But when the storms come, we forget. When trouble arises, the world says, you know what you ought to do? Just drink and forget your problems. You know what Jesus says at the table? Come and drink and remember. Remember what I've done in the past. Remember what I'm doing in the future, what I promised you. As the storm picks up strength, I'm sure the disciples rowed all the harder, wouldn't you? Verse 19, it says, and when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, now remember they're going about 5, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat. They thought he was a ghost or an apparition at first, and they were frightened. But he said to them in his eye, do not be afraid. Jesus was walking on water, a striking display of his deity. I mean, several Old Testament prophets, they did incredible stuff with water. They parted the water. Remember, Moses parted the water. Joshua parted the water. Elijah parted the water. Elisha parted the water. But this is the only record of anyone ever walking on water. Now, why did Jesus come walking on the water? It's more than that he merely wanted to get to the other side. It is to teach the disciples something. But what is it? It is not to teach the disciples how to walk on water, because I'll tell you, they never learned to walk on water. In fact, there are people today who run around claiming they can do miracles, and they're able to perform incredible miracles, but they have problems with this one. They can't walk on water. Jesus walks on water to prove to his disciples, first and foremost, that he can. He can always do the impossible. Remember Mary, the mother of Jesus? She knew this well. She proclaimed, with God, all things are possible. Now, why do they need to know this? Because, you see, Jesus is going to send them out in the very near future to do the impossible. Jesus is going to commission these very ordinary men to go out and make disciples of all people in every land. And they would have even said, that's impossible. They are not natural-born leaders. They're not even seminary graduates. But they will accomplish the impossible, because with God, all things are possible. Now, why do we need to know this? Because God has called you and God has called me to do the impossible as well. He has called you to live a clean life in a dirty world. He has called you to be a faithful witness of Him each and every day. He has called you to be the love and the grace, the hands and the legs of Jesus Christ to this world. He has shown you that this is possible because He is with you always. Now, John tells us in verse 19 that as they saw Jesus walking on the water, they were frightened. It had been a long day. The disciples are now wet and tired. They are ready for a rest from their labors, but nowhere do we read that they had been afraid up until they see Jesus walking on the water. I mean, they had faced similar storms in the past. It did not especially trouble them. It is now something else entirely that is troubling them. It's the sight of Jesus walking on the sea. These disciples were not ignorant. They knew there was, some depth of 600 feet deep. And they knew that, naturally speaking, it's impossible for a man to walk on water. There was something going on before them that transcended human reason and human experience. They could see Jesus doing the impossible. And what is their reaction? They were frightened. They were frightened because they realized there was something happening that was much greater than they could comprehend. They were frightened in a way that the storm could never have frightened them. What frightened them? They were frightened by the holiness of Jesus. Now, what does it mean to be holy? The term holy often conjures up images of pristine serenity. But I feel this falls far short of the real meaning of the word. Holiness literally means set apart. It refers to the quality of otherness. This is the way in which God is holy. He is set apart. He's distinct from the rest of the creatures he has made. The 6th chapter of Isaiah tells us of Isaiah's heavenly vision of the Lord in his temple, and the seraphim who are crying out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And Isaiah's reaction to his vision is compelling, if you recall, in the 6th chapter of Isaiah. Then Isaiah said, "Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Isaiah realizes that he's in the presence of something that is far beyond himself. His vision of the Lord lets him see his own unholiness in stark contrast to Jesus' holiness. He realizes that he and the rest of humanity are far short of such holiness. So these disciples on the Sea of Galilee that night in the middle of the storm realized there is one in their presence that transcends human understanding, and it frightens them. If you have come into the presence of the Lord and you have been just a little bit frightened, then, hey, you probably were in the presence of the Lord. But if you have said that you've come into the presence of the Lord and you weren't frightened, then maybe you really haven't come into the presence of the Lord. C.S. Lewis captures the essence of this in the Chronicles of Narnia, when he describes Aslan, the Christ figure in the book. Let me read a portion. "But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. If the children had never thought so, they were cured of it now. For when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the golden mane and the great, royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes. And then they found they couldn't look at him and went all trembling." I like that. "And went all trembling." The disciples saw Jesus doing what he was doing, which was not possible for mortal men to do, and they went all trembling. They saw it and they were filled with fear. It's at this point that Jesus calls them and instructs them not to be afraid. And the way in which he says it is particularly interesting. "It is I, do not be afraid." This can be taken one of two ways. First, this is the same phrase that's used in the Greek Septuagint in Exodus 3, verse 14, to render the words of the Lord, "I am that I am." The same title, the same name that God used to reveal himself to Israel in the Old Testament. Jesus could be saying here then that, hey, I'm the deity. And it should reassure the disciples that he had control over the winds and the storms. On the other hand, the same phrase can be understood in the way it is translated in our text. "It is I, the same Jesus with whom you've been traveling and eating and sleeping and ministering. You don't have to be afraid of me." Which meaning is in view here? Perhaps they both are. But whichever meaning is being used, it is a call for them to cease being afraid. When I was about 12 years old, I was riding my bike to baseball practice, and I spotted a baby duckling along the road. I noticed that it was being stalked by a tomcat. So I got off my bike and I chased the cat away. The cat didn't go very far. I think the cat was hoping that as soon as I went away, he could come back for some duckling soup. I decided that I would take the little duck home with me for his own safety, if only I could catch him. And as I approached him, he scuttled across the way and he tried to hide under some bushes, and he did a pretty good job. And you know what I wanted to tell him? Little duckling, I'm not the problem. I'm the solution. Jesus must have felt the same way with the disciples. And so he calls out to them and tells them not to fear. He says the same thing to us when we're in the midst of our own storm. The disciples willingly received Jesus into the boat. And what does the text say? Immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. When you get past the fear, then you can come to Jesus. And when you come to Jesus, the other problems you face don't seem so bad. Jesus is our hope in every situation. The disciples have been struggling all night and have worn themselves out fighting the storm with their own strength. What is your storm? And with what are you struggling? The storm of acceptance, the storm of security, the storm of aging and health, the storm of significance, the storm of loneliness. I mean, I can list storm after storm after storm. Whenever you come to the point of saying, I can't do this any longer, invite Jesus into your boat. The more you trust Jesus, the more you find that the problems are not so bad. In fact, what you find is that you have been accepted in Christ. You've been given an eternal security. You're united with the Ancient of Days, God himself. You've been given the opportunity to accomplish that for which you were designed. Often when I look back at my problems, I can see that there was a reason for the storm. The storm was given as a test. The storm reveals that on which I am depending. It's true, ask yourself, as I've often asked myself as I've looked back on a situation, are you depending upon your own strength? Are you depending upon something in this world? Or are you depending upon the one who can still the storm with a word and who promises to bring you safely home? Look at verse 21. Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. They surely must have been glad to have Jesus in that boat. And immediately they were ashore. After all the disciples had witnessed that day, I wondered if they were even surprised that they immediately reached their destination. I mean, 2 pop quizzes in one day, multiplying food and walking on the water, both of which proclaim that Jesus is surely our hope for living, because he is the supreme authority of all the universe. His disciples didn't know what to expect next. Abandoning their earthly pursuits, they followed wherever Jesus led, and they experienced one miracle after another. I mean, what an exciting life! Do you think that's the way that Jesus intends for us to live? I believe it is. Amen.